Have you ever taken a photo that you composed perfectly, the colors are all nice, but the focus is just a little bit off, or the subject isn't quite as sharp as you want it to be? Maybe you're using a lens that isn't too sharp to begin with. Maybe you're using some sort of adapter between your lens and your camera, which might add a bit of softness to your image. Maybe there's some setting that you have on your camera that's making it that way. Or maybe you just had the subject slightly out of focus when you're shooting it, whether it's manual or autofocus. Now sometimes you can just go back and reshoot it, but sometimes you just can't go back and reshoot it. So you're left with this image that's slightly out of focus and doesn't look as good as you want it to be. Or maybe sometimes the photo you shot is fully in focus, but you just want your subject to pop just a little bit more. So that's what I wanted to talk about today, is using the high pass filter in Photoshop to mask out your subject and make it pop a little bit more. Further on in the video, I'll put a little triangle on the video down here to show where it is, but I'll be talking about how to recover slightly out of focus images using the high pass filter. So if you want, you can just skip to that arrow if you don't want to learn how to do the whole process. Let's get started. Here I'm using Lightroom 2021 and Photoshop 2021. They just came out with that release. So here I have Buddy's car. It's a new Corvette. And then I have a out of focus image of Dumbo, which is down under the Manhattan Bridge overpass. So it's a really nice popular area of Brooklyn, but let's just start with this image. So normally you'd go through and do all of your edits, adding So once you've done your basic edit in Lightroom, you can go ahead and start using some filters and brushes to try and make your image pop a little bit more, but you can also do this in Photoshop. So the best way to do this is just go down to your film strip, right click, edit in Adobe Photoshop. And then that'll open up a edited version of this photo in Photoshop that you can start using. And then when you're done in Photoshop, you can either export directly from Photoshop or you can save the image, which will then bring it back into Lightroom if you want to do any further corrections or edits. So I'm not sure if this is a method that super high-end professional photographers use. This is something that works for me, and it's made my photos look better in my opinion. So that's why I thought I'd share it with you. So I guess this is just my little disclaimer saying this may not work for everyone. This may not make your images still as crisp. This may end up making your image less perfect. This may somehow distort some of the pixels, but from every time that I used it, it really makes the image pop. And for most of the images I take, it's just going to Instagram, which compresses it. So it kind of helps the subject pop a little bit more despite the amount of compression that goes into Instagram posts. So the first thing I'm going to do is go through the image and use the healing brush just to get rid of some of the more of the distracting areas and things that don't look as good. So the speed sign was the biggest thing that popped out to me. Maybe a few of these leaves on the ground. And the subject still looks good. There's a little bit of kind of speckles all around it, but that is also part of the wrap on the car. So I'm changing the brush size with the square bracket left and right for smaller and bigger respectively. And I'm just scrolling through the image, finding little imperfections that I don't like. So I'm happy with that result. Next, I'm going to duplicate this layer by dragging layer down onto the new layer icon. And I'm going to hide the old layer. That just makes it so that if I make any big mistakes on this newer layer, I can just go back and revert to this first layer. So this can be healing brushed. The more layers that you start working with, the better it is to label them, because after a while it just gets confusing with so many layers called layer 01, 02, 03, and sometimes you just never know what they are. So now I have my newly healed image ready to go ahead. So if you want to add some sharpening to the entire image, you can go ahead and duplicate this again. Select the top layer, go to Filter, Other, High Pass. Next, it's going to put this really weird gray, gross looking color on top, and you're going to have a radius. So this is similar to the radius where you're sharpening in Lightroom. Normally, if I'm not going too ham with resharpening the image, I'll stick to somewhere between 2 and 3, maybe even less sometimes. Let's go for 2.4. It's going to give you a preview as well to see what you're working with. And we're going to click OK. Next, we're going to go and select this new high pass filter, and we're going to go to the blending modes, and we're going to go somewhere between overlay and linear light. So those are going to give you different looks. If you want super harsh and like crisp, you're going to want to go with linear light. Vivid light, hard light, soft light, and overlay are going to give you all different results. This part is all up to you based on how much crispy and sharpness you want, and maybe sometimes you might want a little bit of soft sharpness. This is where you might go into soft light. For extra crispiness, I'm going to go with linear light. I can also go hard light, that's also pretty crispy, but linear light works for me. And now you can see if I toggle this on and off, we really see a difference, especially when I zoom in here and I toggle this on and off. You can see how much everything comes alive with this one filter, adds crispiness to the whole grill and even the little dots in the wrap. But this also added the filter to the trees, making them a little bit crispier even though they're really out of focus. So that is where you might want to mask out your subject. So I'm going to go and deselect this and select my base layer. And what you can do is maybe try the magnetic lasso tool and just kind of click and trace your mouse around your subject. Hope that it selects everything. And now I have my subject selected. The reason I didn't do this over the gray filter level is because there's a lot less contrast to be working with. So some of the auto select tools on Photoshop work a lot with contrast. So using the base layer helps a lot for getting a better, finer edge. Now you can see here that it didn't do a perfect job, so what we can do is use this tool again, but hold Shift, and we're going to do the exact same thing. Select the parts where we want to add and continue like that. I'm going to click inside while holding Shift. You click first, and I'm just going to keep tracing. I'm not holding down on the mouse. I'm just dragging it along, and it's finding the line that I'm tracing around with. And I'm adding that. Now here we have a space that we need to deselect, so I'm going to go ahead and click outside and start dragging in here. That did a pretty good job. Got another little spot here that we need to add, so hold Shift. And there we go. So that's pretty much I'm going to give that a good enough mask for this. Doesn't really have to be too perfect since it's just adding a little bit of crispiness. So now that we have this selection active, we can turn on our high pass filter and select it, and now this marching ants selection is going to be applied to this new filter layer. So since we have the car selected here, I'm going to go to select inverse, and that's going to select everything other than the car, and I'm going to delete. Now you can see in the little thumbnail that it's just the little car with transparency all around it. One thing that might happen sometimes is that it may not work. So sometimes what you'll have to do is click E and erase, and it's going to give you a pop-up window that says, this layer isn't editable, do you want to rasterize the image or something like that? Then you click yes, and then you should be able to go back and delete that selection. And Command D will get rid of those marching ants. And now we have just the car that's active. If we want, we can go ahead and duplicate this to add even more. Or if this is too much, we can also change the opacity of this layer. Maybe you just want just a tiny little bit of extra detail, so that might be where you would drop down the opacity and use a less harsh blending mode. So there's a lot of different options that you have here, but that's basically a super simple way to add a little bit of detail to your image. Here you can see if I merge all the high pass filters and the base layer and turn on the original base layer, and I can toggle in between, you can see that it really adds a whole lot of detail, and it makes the original image look almost out of focus based on the amount of detail that we brought in. I'm looking at things like the headlight right here and the tire tread. It's definitely a lot of difference now. So that's basically it. You can go ahead and go to File, Export, Export As, and export your image this way. JPEG, do whatever you want to do for your export. Or you can just go ahead and save, and you'll see that there's no pop-up window, and that's because it's saving a copy of the edited version right beside the original photo that was unedited. So if we go back to Lightroom, we can see that there's two of these photos now. This is the original photo that we had in Lightroom. You can tell because I had my little speed sign here, and then the new Photoshop version. So now, since we've saved it and brought it back into Lightroom, you can see that it's edit.tiff. Photoshop can't export back into a raw image, so TIFF is basically the closest it can get while preserving as much of the detail and data in the image that it can. Don't be worried that it's not a .cr2 or .arw file. It's all good. But now that we have it back in Lightroom, we have fully flattened tools here because this is a new image, but we can go ahead and edit it some more if we want. That's just making it look worse, but maybe we want to add a bit of a filter and maybe darken the breast. So now, unfortunately, we can't A/B or before and after the final image to the original raw photo. But what we can do is go to the reference view, drag the new image on the reference, and then drag the original photo onto the active. Press your little backslash, and then that brings up the original photo. And you can go up and down, see the different views, maybe check it out like this. But there we have it. This is a super crisp car shot. This is my buddy Jimmy's, so I'll throw his Instagram link down in the description if you want to go check it out, if you like seeing photos of cars. And that's that. So next we have this image of Dumbo. We can see that it's really out of focus. I was shooting with a manual lens, and I wasn't checking my focus peaking, so it was super out of focus. So I'm going to go ahead and do a quick little edit on this photo. We can see here that using the texture slider and the clarity slider will add a little bit of extra detail, but it's not really enough for what we want to do here. It's still really blurry. I'm going to go with the reverse S-curve and try and add a little bit of detail into the highlights and lowlights here. And we can try and see if the sharpening tool will do anything. I doubt that it will do a whole lot here. So all I'm doing is holding Option and dragging these sliders, and that'll show us a black and white or gray version of the edit that we're doing. Just shows you a little bit of a better view of the detail that you're working with. So that's a little bit better there, but we can still see that it's still kind of blurry. It's not the greatest. So that's a pretty quick edit. I'm happy to send this off to Photoshop. So we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to go edit in Adobe Photoshop. It's going to take a few seconds to load up. So we've got our image here in Photoshop. I'm going to unlock the first layer and duplicate it again and hide the original. So this is our image right here. I'm going to duplicate it again and do the exact same thing. Go to Filter, Other, High Pass. And this time I'm going to go a little bit bigger. I'm going to go up to about 10. And I'm going to copy the original base layer again. I'm going to do another high pass, and this one is going to go down to 2.5-ish. I'm just going to rename these layers to the amount of high pass that I have here. So what I'm doing here is I'm targeting the really big thick lines with the 10. And then I'm targeting the more fine details with the 2.5. You can see that when I add the 10 pixel radius, there's a lot of thick detail in all the big lines. When I hide that, we get a lot of smaller details. So I'm going to put the low over the high. I'm going to go ahead and do my blending modes again. I'm going to try linear light as well, but now this is where we're going to have to edit the opacities. The thick line is going to have to be pretty small. And then we can toggle them both on and off. We can see that there's definitely a lot of detail, but as we zoom out, there's detail all around. So what I'm going to want to do is select my number 10. I'm going to hit E for erase, and I'm just going to go really, really big and really, really soft. So now I'm just going to isolate the number 10. I'm going to put the opacity all the way up, and I'm just going to erase the parts that I don't want. Might be a little bit too big here. Adding a lot of softness so that it adds that realistic focus distance look. And I'm going to do the same with the lower amount. I'm going to go all the way up to 100% and get rid of this. When you're changing the opacity numbers, you should take note of the opacities that worked for you before. And I'm going to go back down to 70, 65, and 13. And here we have it. The bridge is not perfect. If we zoom in, definitely not perfect. But if we toggle both of these off, definitely came a long way. And honestly, for an Instagram post, I think that really helps it out. Especially if we zoom out, that looks perfectly in focus. And that's basically it. That's how I use high pass to pull focus back into a blurry photo, and how I use high pass just to add pop to the subjects of my photos. Again, same as last time, we can save this. It's gonna save down here, and when it's ready, it will open up in Lightroom. And here we have the edited TIFF version of this photo. Let's maybe see if we want to add, maybe try some added clarity, see how that works, some texture, just pulling in a little bit more extra bit of detail. See how that works. And then we may add a bit of noise reduction because of all these edits. Maybe pull back some detail. And then if we toggle the detail tab on and off, you can see that that really helped. And there we have it, ready for Instagram. And that's 2 different examples of using high pass in your photos. That's it for me today. I hope you enjoyed this one and I hope you learned something. Drop a comment if you've ever used high pass in one of these capacities or a different way. I'm always down to hear some new ways to use it because clearly it is super helpful. That's it for me. Catch you in the next one. Peace.